Welcome to Video Connection. I'm Aaron, this is Dan, and today we're going to be talking about the Super Mario Brothers movie. Not that one, that one. It is directed by Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, starring Bob Hoskins, John Leguizamo, and Dennis Hopper. It's rated PG, and it's currently available on a crappy DVD for super cheap. Two Brooklyn plumbers, Mario and Luigi, must travel to another dimension to rescue a princess from the evil dictator King Koopa and stop him from taking over the world. So, Dan, what was your gut reaction to Super Mario Brothers?
Well, I'll tell you, I wanted to like this movie. I kind of was thinking maybe it's been, it's gotten a bad rap all these years. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it'll be sort of like a lovable gem from the 90s. So I went into it with an open mind, tried to get into the young kid mindset. I got some chicken nuggets to eat and sat down to watch it. And for about the first 10 minutes, I thought maybe that was going to be the case. There's kind of a weird charm to it. And then it goes off the rails. And ultimately, it's a bad movie. But I think it would be unfair to simply call it a bad movie and move on. Because there are, as we've discovered, reasons why it's a bad movie. And I feel like we can't talk about this unless we really dig in and sort of unearth some of the reasons why this movie is what it is. So why don't you dig into some of that and tell us some of the things we figured out.
As with anything, you read about stuff online, you never know. There's a lot of he said, she said. I'm inclined to take everything we've learned with a grain of salt because there's no guarantee that it's all true. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the things that I read about, there were kind of the same stories coming from multiple sources, so I feel fairly confident that this isn't just rumor. So the condensed version of what happened was that you had this couple, Rocky and Annabelle, who were the directors, and they signed on to direct this movie when they read a script that had a more sort of serious adult tone to it. And that was the movie they were excited about making. Then once they started making the movie, the studio, I would say wisely, said, wait a minute, this is based on a kid's video game. We should make it a more family-friendly script. Which is true. So then they did. And there were a bunch of rewrites and such. Well, the directors didn't like that. So from that point on, they weren't getting along with the studio, and they were trying super hard to make the movie they wanted to make, which was no longer the movie the studio wanted to make. And then, on top of that, they became very difficult to work with, and multiple stars have referenced what an unpleasant experience they had.
How do you know? I've been listening to pipes all my life. Come on.
So it sounds like nobody was happy with anybody making the movie, and that's a huge part of why it was such a mess. An addendum to all of that that's very interesting to me personally is that the directors before this had worked on a TV show from the 80s called Max Headroom. Now, for those of us who are old enough to remember, that was a very unique, very cool, very 80s TV show.
Max, what I want to know is, why are the only funny lines on this show the ones behind me?
That had a cyberpunk flavor to it and was definitely aiming at a more mature audience. And once I learned that, a lot of this movie made sense because I could see a connection between what that was like and what this movie was like. So that's kind of our groundwork for the insanity.
Another thing that I thought was worth mentioning is that if the IMDb trivia is to be believed, basically every actress in Hollywood was offered the chance to play Daisy.
Yeah.
I think it would be easier to list who wasn't considered for the role of Daisy than it would to be who was.
More so than any other movie we've ever watched, I would recommend you look the movie up on IMDb and go to the trivia section because it's very long and there's a lot of interesting things to learn.
Some more tragic than others.
But for all that, I did want to say that I'm blown away by how insane this movie is, like especially considering the source material, because you were starting with something that was, this fantasy thing that doesn't have much of a basis in reality, and then you went in this completely different, insane direction that also does not have a basis in reality, and it's so strange that you would deviate so far. I will say that there's a certain charm to it that I appreciated, and there's a ridiculous amount of creativity that went into it. So I can't criticize them for not trying, because there was so many scenes where it was just like, these sets, the costumes, the thought you put into the, reason why that thing shaped the way it is. And honestly, for a movie that deviated so far away from the video games, I was kind of shocked how many times I was like, oh, wait a minute. That costume looks like that because that's supposed to be like that thing from the game. So it wasn't like they abandoned it, but I kind of felt like they made Mario flashcards and then used them to fill out a Mad Lib movie script, and that's how this movie got made.
Exactly. So I was wondering if perhaps the Mario IP hurt the movie as it is, because it almost was so weird that it almost worked as one of those sort of like late 80s, early 90s, I don't even know the word for it, just these like off-the-wall movies that kind of had their own sort of charm. It didn't succeed at being one of those because it had to shoehorn in these Mario things. And a lot of it seemed to me like a very different movie that just had like time to drop the Bob-omb reference and the Bullet Bill reference and the Super Scope reference, and trying to take two different movies and mash them together in a way that just didn't work.
Absolutely. I remember thinking pretty early on in the movie that the way to appreciate this is to disregard Mario completely. Don't think about the game. Don't think about this as being related to it in any way, and just watch this wacky fantasy movie that's happening because it works better as that.
Right.
And I would agree. If you almost left it the way it was and you took all the things out and you didn't hear names you knew and you didn't see Easter eggs from the video game, we might actually like the movie better.
Right. Like it wouldn't necessarily have been a good film, but it would have probably gotten more of a pass from people of like, oh, look at this, plucky, weird movie. It's got a lot of charm to it, as opposed to look at this failure of a Mario movie.
I will give them a little bit of praise. I think the casting was actually really well done. It's funny to me thinking of other movies where, you got somebody like Dennis Hopper. He's played crazy characters lots of times. I was thinking in particular of Waterworld, which is another movie that's considered to be a terrible movie, but has its own unique charm, where he was a crazy bad guy in a similar vein. And it was just like, yeah, he's good at those parts. And even in movies that aren't great, he's still pretty fun to watch playing those characters. Yeah. What they were trying to do, it's like Bob Hoskins as their live action version of Mario is like, well, that wasn't a bad idea. And like John Leguizamo was like, no, I get it. You wanted some flavor. So it's like, oh, he'll be the younger, cockier, not as smart brother. Cool. That was, fine. They didn't have much of anything to do with the script, so it didn't help. But I thought the casting for the most part was well done.
Yeah, I think I would go so far as to say you could have made a good Mario Brothers movie with the same cast. In particular, I think Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo. I know we've expressed appreciation for John Leguizamo on this channel before. I think they could have been a really good Mario and Luigi. I think they were within the confines of the script they were working with. Again, I go back to the first 10 minutes of the movie when it's, them in Brooklyn driving around in the van and doing wacky plumbing things. I think there was a good start there for a charming Mario movie. It's just that when this movie takes its little turn, the suspension of disbelief gets pulled really hard. It quickly unravels and becomes hard to even process what you're seeing at times.
I'm not even 100% sure that it's worth trying to explain how far away that got from the games, which, mind you, the games are pretty simple. When you look at them, they're not that complex, but the things that they bent over backwards trying to explain almost didn't need an explanation.
You may think of evolution as an upward process.
And I feel like that was a big part of what caused them trouble. I don't know why the movie Labyrinth is coming to mind, but I was just thinking of you go through a portal into this fantasy world. There is no explanation for why the crazy is crazy. It just is crazy. Look at this crazy thing. And that's the fun. That would have worked for this. But instead, they went a completely different direction and, we got to explain where this came from, and this is the science of why it is the way it is, and here's all this backstory. Again, I have to give them credit because even though it didn't work, it was thought out. There's so many times when you see a movie like this and you're just like, what are you even writing? And this one, it's like, it's insane, but at least you made this connect to this so that it has its own logic. That's what I'm trying to say. And when they first get to this Koopa land, right out of the gate, I'm like, look at this massive set. Look at these weird cable cars. Look how all the people are dressed similar. There's 1,000 extras in this scene. How many of those guards did you make those costumes? There's there was a lot of stuff going on. It just wasn't in service of anything that was really worth it.
They sure did a lot of things. They just weren't really Mario things.
Yeah.
Dinosaur.
Taking a children's IP and making a grim and gritty adultized version of it isn't necessarily a bad idea, except that it's usually not the first time that IP has been brought to film that you do that.
Right.
So if you're going to make the first Super Mario Brothers movie, make it true to the source material, or at least aimed at the same demographic. And then after that, if you want to spin it into like, here's the hardened war Mario version, do that later. But don't do that on your first time out.
For sure. And, it almost goes without saying, even in the early 90s, you should have made an animated Mario movie. That makes 100 times more sense than making a live action one.
One of the things that was weird to me was all of the inhabitants of the Koopa land are supposed to be descended from dinosaurs, but most of them just look like people. And was there not a budget for costumes for all the extras? Like, you mentioned the sort of over-explaining that they did, but some of it with the evolving and devolving of characters just seemed like a convenient excuse for the fact that nobody looked like the characters they're portraying.
Right.
I also want to say, as a side note, that the opening maybe 2 or 3 minutes of this could have been the start of a horror film.
It could have.
There's a young woman running through the rain, delivers a package, on the doorstep of the church. Could it be a baby? No, the nuns unwrap it and there's an egg. And the fact that these nuns are not just utterly screaming in terror as this egg hatches and a human baby comes out of it, like in a church, like that's a horror opening right there. But then it just, that's that, Different movie immediately after.
So this is a technical issue, and I'm curious if you noticed this, but there was a ridiculous amount of dubbing that went on in this movie. Must have just grabbed me a couple times in some early shots, so I started paying closer attention, and it just felt like every couple minutes there was somebody who clearly wasn't saying that line at the time it was being recorded. Mm-hmm. And then there were other moments where, a character was conveniently facing away, and I'm like, okay, so he didn't say anything there, and you just jammed it in. And then there were other times where I saw online someone even called out. There's one part where somebody was like facing the camera and they say a line even though their lips aren't moving. And I was already going, what is it? Was the audio, were the people who were doing this not qualified? Did they not know what was going on? And then I was looking around the sets because the times when they weren't dubbed, I was like, was there just too much echo in all these massive sets you built and it just wasn't good audio? Lo and behold, in that IMDb trivia, there was a post supervisor who worked on this that said they had never done so much ADR on one movie in their life. And it was like, I knew it! Mm-hmm. Like, I knew I'm not crazy. This is happening. It was nice to see that someone on the post-production end of it was like having to deal with a lot of problems.
One of the fun things about the movie is just picking out people that you recognize from other stuff. Of course, Koopa's right-hand henchwoman. Most people would probably recognize her from the Harry Potter films, but also more recently she was in Andor as Andor's surrogate mother. There was also either Iggy or Spike, one of the two, is sort of a legend as the parking attendant from Ferris Bueller's Day Off that steals the Ferrari. Whichever
of those guys, Iggy or Spike, that wasn't the guy you mentioned was Fisher Stevens, who's another character actor that's been around for quite some time. To me, that was yet another thing with the casting, where it's like those two guys playing wacky henchmen was like, that was a good call. I'm not sure the way you wrote and designed the characters was appealing enough to enjoy being around them, but it could have been great. What was confusing to me is that when this movie came out, if you were old enough to sit through it, you were old enough to be confused by why it had nothing to do with Mario Brothers. So it's this movie that I don't know what the audience was. Based on our earlier discussion, there was obviously a large group of people with a bunch of really different ideas about who the audience was, and that was the problem. I think the thing that I was left with is you see the finished product and you're just blown away. How does this happen? How do people spend millions of dollars and make that? And then there's so many other scripts that are written that I'm sure are good that no one makes them into a movie. But that somehow became a movie. Mm-hmm. Mm.
And again, not to besmirch those involved.
No.
Another thing in the IMDb trivia suggests that John Leguizamo said that he and Bob Hoskins would get drunk between takes as a way just to get through what they were being asked to do. And I don't blame them.
It sounds like, nobody had a good time making this, which is a shame because it should have been a lot of fun. But it is what it is.
Yep.
I think all of this is for us to say we're much more excited to see this new animated movie because it's starting off on the right foot.
I will say, now that we've watched this movie, I'm kind of hoping the new one at least throws in some references to the old one.
Oh, man.
Even if only to have someone start to say something and then another character's like, no, we don't talk about that. Like, just an acknowledgement that it exists it would go a long way for me.
Why on the poster art is everything blue and you don't have a guy in red and a guy in green?
Why did they not get to wear red and green until more than an hour into the movie?
This is totally the movie where you get to let him wear a red t-shirt and his brother wear a green t-shirt with their blue jeans and nobody will
Plumbers
care.
can wear overalls with colored t-shirts.
Yep.
That's a normal plumber thing to wear.
It would look great. When you get to the scene where you're stealing the stuff out of the lockers or whatever, it's like, oh, hey, green, my favorite color. Red, my favorite color. And then they can continue with their powered-up outfits.
The first time they put on bright colors, it was like orange and pink as they go to the nightclub.
This isn't like Superman where you're watching the character who will transform to become... It's like, no, they're already Mario and Luigi. Just let them wear their outfits.
While we're on camera, I have to get something from my shelf here. You can probably see these Marios on camera, but one thing you might not be able to see is this guy right here.
I didn't realize you had a John Leguizamo action figure. That should be like our mascot.
Yeah.
So, Dan, would you recommend Super Mario Brothers?
What a difficult question to answer. Because I almost feel like you gotta see it. Out of curiosity, if nothing else.
Yes.
Your mind will be blown by what you see. You are not prepared at all for the things that are going to happen in this movie, but you kind of need to see it. Do I recommend it as a movie? No. It started off fine. It becomes a chore. It's got a nice cast that's fun to watch do crazy things, and you can speculate about how much did Dennis Hopper understand what was going on. But what about you? What do you think?
I don't think I'm far off of where you're at. I would say this movie is something to watch in a sort of archaeological sense. This is a learning experience.
As if you were uncovering dinosaur bones in the site of a hotel being built or something like that.
I do think that there's a strong possibility you will be entertained, maybe not 100% of the time, but if you're someone who's interested in the history of movie making and learning about it, there's just so much interesting stuff going on here.
That's fair.
But I would concur, no, it is not a good movie.
This is the worst movie that we are both recommending you watch.
Yeah, stick with us. It could only get worse.
That's all the time we have for now. As always, thank you for watching Video Connection. We really appreciate it. And if you're not a subscriber, if you could subscribe, that would really make a big deal to us. We both hate asking for this kind of thing, but if you made it this far through the video, you must not hate us completely. So it would really help us out. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.